stop chasing happiness, but learn to protect your peace. Somewhere along the way, happiness and peace got treated like the same thing. They're not. Happiness is a mood, peace is a foundation, and confusing the two is quietly wrecking a lot of people's lives because they keep chasing the mood while trampling the foundation to get it. Happiness spikes and fades. It shows up when the weather's good, when the check clears, when someone says something kind, when the scale reads a number you like, and it leaves just as fast, for reasons just as small. Traffic, a comment, a bad night's sleep. You cannot build a life on something that unstable. But peace is different. Peace doesn't ask conditions to line up first. Peace is what's left when you've stopped needing every condition to be perfect in order to be okay. And here's the part worth saying clearly at the start. You can chase happiness for the rest of your life and never once touch peace. But if you build real peace, happiness starts showing up on its own, more often than you'd expect, as a side effect instead of a destination. Chasing happiness directly does something strange to a person over time. It turns every ordinary day into a referendum. Did today measure up? Did I feel good enough? Was this satisfying enough to count? That kind of constant self-audit is exhausting, and worse, it's rigged against you from the start, because feelings were never built to hold steady under that kind of scrutiny. You'll have entire days that were perfectly fine, productive, decent, and you'll walk away from them feeling like a failure simply because they didn't produce the specific emotional high you were quietly grading them against. That's the trap. You start treating an inherently unstable thing as if it were a scoreboard, and then you wonder why you feel like you're constantly losing. Peace doesn't set you up for that same trap, because peace was never asking for a high, it's asking for something much more attainable, a baseline you're not constantly at war with. I want to describe an ordinary afternoon, because it's a better illustration than any dramatic story could be. Nothing happened. No good news, no bad news. A stack of unremarkable tasks, a decent cup of coffee, a walk outside where the weather was just fine, not beautiful, just fine. If you were grading that day on happiness, on some spike of excitement or joy, it would score close to 0. Forgettable. But underneath the flatness of it, there was something steadier running the whole time, a kind of quiet okayness that didn't depend on the day producing anything remarkable at all. That's peace. It's not exciting to describe, and that's exactly the point. It isn't supposed to be exciting, it's supposed to be durable. You can have peace on a boring day, a hard day, even a genuinely bad day, because peace was never contingent on the day being good in the first place. Happiness can't say the same. Happiness needs the day to cooperate. Peace doesn't ask the day for permission. Here's the part that doesn't get said enough. The more you organize your life around chasing happiness, the more fragile you actually become, because you've quietly outsourced your well-being to 100 things you don't control. Whether the traffic's bad, whether your coworker is in a mood, whether the algorithm decided to show you something upsetting first thing in the morning. Chase happiness hard enough, and you end up handing the steering wheel of your entire emotional state to circumstances that were never going to hold still for you. People who build their lives this way tend to describe themselves as being on a roller coaster, and they usually say it like it's just their personality, an unfortunate trait they were born with. It's rarely a personality trait. It's usually just the predictable result of tying your internal state directly to external conditions that were always going to keep shifting. You're not unstable. You've just been standing on something that was never built to hold still. Peace requires something happiness never does. It requires you to stop needing things to go a certain way in order to be all right. That's a much harder ask than it sounds, because it means giving up the fantasy that if you just get enough things arranged correctly, the job, the relationship, the body, the bank balance, you'll finally arrive somewhere permanently comfortable. Peace asks you to find your footing before all of that lines up, not after. This isn't the same as giving up on wanting things to improve. You can want a better job, a healthier body, a repaired relationship, and still hold peace in the meantime, while you're working toward it. In fact, peace tends to make you more effective at improving those things, not less, because you're no longer operating from the frantic energy of someone who believes their entire well-being is riding on the outcome. Desperation is a terrible strategy for pursuing anything. Peace, strangely, makes you a calmer, steadier, more consistent version of yourself while you go after exactly the same goals. Watch how differently a setback lands on someone chasing happiness versus someone anchored in peace. For the happiness chaser, a setback is catastrophic in a specific way. It doesn't just cost them the outcome, it costs them their entire emotional footing, because their footing was never independent of the outcome in the first place. Lose the job, and they don't just lose the income. They lose the thing they've been quietly using to measure whether they were doing okay as a person. For someone who's built real peace, the same setback still hurts. Peace was never advertised as numbness. and pretending otherwise does nobody any favors. But it doesn't take the floor out from under them, because the floor was never made of that particular outcome to begin with. They can feel the disappointment fully, process it, and still know, underneath it, that they're going to be all right, because all right was never contingent on this one thing going their way. That's the practical difference peace actually buys you, not the absence of hard days. The ability to have a hard day without it becoming an identity crisis. There's a specific sneaky cost to organizing your life around chasing happiness that doesn't get discussed enough. It quietly steers you away from anything that requires short-term discomfort, even when that discomfort would lead somewhere genuinely good. Difficult conversations get avoided because they wouldn't feel good in the moment. Hard workouts get skipped because today doesn't feel like the day. Necessary changes get postponed indefinitely because starting them wouldn't spark joy right now, and joy was the whole point, wasn't it? Peace doesn't have that same blind spot. Peace can sit calmly with short-term discomfort because it isn't demanding an immediate emotional payoff to justify the effort. You can have the hard conversation, finish the difficult workout, start the uncomfortable change, all while holding your peace intact, because peace was never asking the moment to feel good. It was just asking you to stay steady while you did the thing that needed doing. That steadiness turns out to be exactly what most meaningful progress actually requires. It's worth being precise here, because peace gets misunderstood constantly, usually in one of two directions. Peace is not passivity. It's not shrugging at everything, disengaging from your own goals, or pretending problems don't matter because you've decided to stay zen about everything. That version of peace is really just avoidance wearing a calmer outfit, and it tends to leave people quietly stuck, mistaking numbness for tranquility. Real peace also isn't the absence of emotion. You can feel real grief, real frustration, real disappointment, and still hold peace underneath all of it. The same way a deep body of water can have real waves on the surface while staying calm several feet down. Peace doesn't mean nothing bothers you. It means what bothers you doesn't have the power to completely capsize you anymore, because you've built something steadier underneath the waves than you used to have. Think honestly about how much of modern life is built around the promise that happiness is just one purchase, one achievement, one relationship away. New job, and you'll finally feel settled. New relationship, and the restlessness will finally stop. New house, new body, new title, and this time it'll actually stick. It never quite does, and it's worth asking why, instead of just assuming you picked the wrong goal and moving on to chase the next one. It doesn't stick, because happiness was never designed to be a permanent state you arrive at and then stay in. It's designed to spike and recede, over and over, regardless of what you've achieved, because that's simply how the underlying machinery works. Chase the next spike hard enough, thinking this one will finally be the one that lasts, and you end up on a treadmill that never actually delivers the permanent arrival it keeps promising. Peace doesn't make that same promise, and that's precisely what makes it trustworthy. It's not selling you a permanent high. It's offering you a floor that holds regardless of whether the next spike ever comes. Peace doesn't get built during the big dramatic moments of your life nearly as much as it gets built in how you handle the completely unremarkable ones. It's built in the small decision to not spiral over a minor inconvenience. It's built in choosing not to catastrophize a single piece of criticism into evidence that your entire life is falling apart. It's built in choosing not to catastrophize a single piece of criticism into evidence that your entire life is falling apart. It's built in choosing not to catastrophize a single piece of criticism into evidence that your entire life is falling apart. It's built in the quiet discipline of noticing an anxious thought, naming it as just a thought, and not immediately treating it as an emergency that requires your full attention right now. None of that is glamorous. Nobody's writing a highlight reel out of "didn't spiral over a mildly annoying email today." But that's exactly the material peace is actually constructed from. Thousands of small, boring, unwitnessed choices to stay steady instead of letting a minor disturbance become a major one. Do that consistently enough, across enough ordinary days, and you end up with something happiness chasing was never going to give you. A baseline that holds regardless of what today happens to bring. There's a difference worth drawing out between protecting your peace and becoming defensive or closed off, because people sometimes collapse the two together and end up isolating themselves in the name of protecting their energy. Real peace protection isn't about avoiding anything uncomfortable or cutting off anyone who challenges you. It's about being selective regarding what you let take up permanent residence in your head, which criticisms you actually sit with and consider, and which ones you notice, register, and let pass through without setting up camp. You can absolutely hear hard feedback and stay at peace. You can go through a difficult season and stay at peace. What you're actually protecting isn't your comfort. It's your ability to stay steady while engaging fully with a life that was never going to be free of friction. That's a meaningfully different project than building walls to avoid friction altogether, and it's worth being honest with yourself about which one you're actually doing. One place this distinction matters enormously is in how you relate to the people around you. Chasing happiness tends to quietly turn relationships into vending machines. You show up expecting the other person to dispense a good feeling, and when they don't, on a given day, the relationship starts to feel like it's failing you. That's an enormous unfair weight to put on another human being, expecting them to be a reliable source of your emotional highs. Peace changes that dynamic considerably. You can love someone, enjoy their company, want the best for them, without requiring them to keep your emotional state afloat. That takes an enormous amount of pressure off both people. Relationships built on two people chasing happiness from each other tend to be exhausting because both people are quietly waiting to be filled up by the other. Relationships built on two people who've each found their own peace tend to be considerably lighter because nobody's showing up starving, expecting the other person to be the meal. There's a simple test you can run on yourself tomorrow morning before the day gets a chance to shape your answer for you. Notice the very first thing your mind reaches for the moment you wake up. If it's some version of, I hope today feels good, or I hope nothing ruins my mood, you're likely operating from the happiness-chasing frame, even if you've never named it that way. If instead it's closer to whatever today brings, I'll handle it, you're closer to operating from peace, whether or not the day ahead looks easy. Most people run through this test honestly, discover they've been quietly running the happiness version for years, without ever choosing it deliberately. It's the default setting, mostly because it's the version constantly being sold back to you. Every ad, every algorithmically curated feed, every treat yourself campaign is implicitly reinforcing the idea that your job today is to go feel good, and that anything short of that is a problem to be solved with the next purchase or the next distraction. Nobody's selling you peace nearly as aggressively, because peace, unlike a mood, doesn't need you to buy anything to access it. There's no product behind it, which might be exactly why it gets talked about so much less than it should. If you've spent years chasing the highs of happiness, an honest attempt at building peace instead can feel, at first, disappointingly flat. There's no rush to it, no spike, just a steady, unremarkable sense of being okay that doesn't announce itself the way a good mood does. A lot of people mistake that flatness for failure, assume they're doing it wrong, and quietly go back to chasing the next mood spike because at least that felt like something. But that flatness is not a bug, it's the entire feature. A roller coaster feels exciting precisely because it's designed to throw you around. Up, down, fast turns, sudden drops. That's thrilling for the length of the ride, and it's a terrible way to actually live, day after day, for decades. Peace, by contrast, is closer to standing on solid, flat ground. It doesn't throw you around, which means it also doesn't have the same capacity to excite you the way a sharp high does. But it also means you're not spending your whole life bracing for the next drop either. Once you stop expecting peace to deliver a thrill, and start appreciating it for what it actually offers, reliability, the flatness stops feeling like a letdown and starts feeling like relief. It's worth being honest that peace is easy to talk about in calm, hypothetical terms and much harder to actually hold on to when real pressure shows up. A health scare, a financial crisis, a relationship falling apart in real time. This is exactly where the distinction between peace and happiness matters most, because in genuinely hard seasons, happiness isn't even on the table. Nobody's expecting to feel good while they're in the middle of a crisis, but peace can still be present even then, in a much quieter, less obvious form. It doesn't look like calm in the sense of feeling fine about what's happening. It looks more like a persistent, steady thread underneath the panic. A part of you that, even while everything else is loud and frightening, still trusts that you'll find a way through this, whatever it turns out to be. That thread doesn't eliminate the fear or the grief. It just keeps you from being completely swept away by it.
People who've been through genuinely difficult seasons and came out the other side intact will often describe exactly this. Not that they felt happy during the ordeal, which would be an odd thing to claim, but that something in them stayed steady enough to keep functioning, to keep making decisions, to keep showing up for the people who needed them, even while the rest of them was struggling.
That steadiness is peace doing its actual job, in the exact conditions it was built for. Certain everyday habits erode peace so gradually that most people never trace the fatigue back to its actual source. Constant comparison is one of the biggest. Scrolling through curated snapshots of other people's best moments and measuring your own unremarkable Tuesday against them. That habit doesn't just dent your mood for a minute. Repeated daily, it slowly convinces you that your baseline life is somehow insufficient, which is exactly the kind of belief that makes real peace almost impossible to hold on to, because peace requires being okay with where you actually are, not where a curated feed suggests you should be. Another quiet drain is the habit of rehearsing arguments or conversations that haven't happened yet, running through every possible way a future interaction might go wrong. That kind of mental rehearsal feels productive in the moment, like preparation, but it mostly just keeps your nervous system braced for a threat that, in most cases, never actually arrives in the form you imagined. A third is the habit of needing the last word, needing to be right in every disagreement, needing other people to validate your version of events before you can let something go. That one is particularly costly because it ties your internal steadiness to something entirely outside your control, whether someone else agrees with you, and peace can't survive being outsourced that completely. None of these habits are moral failings. They're just patterns worth noticing, because noticing them is the first step toward loosening their grip. One last thing worth being honest about. Peace isn't a state you arrive at permanently and then get to keep without further attention, the way people sometimes talk about finding it, as if it were an object sitting somewhere waiting to be picked up. It's closer to a skill you keep practicing, one that gets easier to return to over time but never becomes fully automatic. Some days you'll lose it entirely, get pulled into comparison, get rattled by a piece of criticism, spiral over something that, looked at clearly, wasn't actually a crisis. That's not evidence the whole project failed. It's just evidence you're human, and humans lose their footing regularly, even after years of practice. What actually matters is the return trip, how quickly you notice you've drifted, and how quickly you find your way back to steady ground once you have. Early on, that return trip might take days. With practice, it shrinks to hours, then to minutes, then sometimes to the length of a single deep breath in the middle of a hard moment. That shrinking gap, far more than any single perfect day, is what real progress with this actually looks like. You're not trying to become someone who never loses their peace. You're trying to become someone who finds their way back to it faster than they used to, every single time life knocks them off it. Tonight, instead of asking yourself the usual question, was today a happy day? Did I feel good enough? Try a different one. Was I at peace today? Not was everything perfect, not did I feel great every hour, but underneath whatever happened, was there a steadiness running through it that didn't depend on the day going exactly right? If the honest answer is no, that's useful information, not a failure to feel bad about. It tells you where the actual work is, not in manufacturing more good moods, which will always be temporary no matter how skillfully you manufacture them, but in building something steadier underneath all of it that doesn't ask the day to perform before you're allowed to feel all right. Stop grading your life by how happy it made you today. Start noticing whether you're at peace, regardless of what today brought. One of those is a mood you'll spend your whole life chasing and never permanently catch. The other is a floor you can actually build, one ordinary day at a time, and once it's there, it holds, with or without the good mood showing up to visit.